Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Morning, Bill. Thanks, everyone, for coming to Coffee and Conversation. And I'm from New Jersey. And so when I say the stuff that flows through wires, I say electricity and not city. But we're here to talk about electrification of transport with Duncan McIntyre and Roland Reynolds. And before I launch into this, I want to make everyone aware that 40 years ago today at 4:44 in the morning, a bunch of fire trucks arrived at the College of the Atlantic campus. And the main building of COA, Kelber Hall, the big building, the main building, that sat over on the red bricks burned to the ground in 1983, 40 years ago. And that we've come this far is incredible testament to so many people out here, including people like Roland, who has just joined the board of the college. This is 1 year in for Roland. He's with Industry Ventures, a venture capital firm. He's been there 13 plus years. That company manages about $5 billion, and the expectation is that Roland will bring our own endowment to about the same within a few years.
It's your job.
Okay, all right, yeah, he's going to help. But he's also served on the board of Groton, the Groton School, and the National Cathedral School in Washington, D.C. So in Roland, we've got a great combo of a financial mind, but also someone who understands how institutions of education are run. So Roland, thank you for joining COA's board, and please take it away. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Darren. That was a really nice introduction. I see my wife and my son just joined. Good morning. Thanks to all of you for coming. I think on a really sincere note, thank you, Darren, for your leadership of COA. This is an incredible institution that I am relatively new to, having just joined 12 months ago. One of the things that I think about is what a privilege it is for those of us who come for the summers, for those of you who live here, to have such an incredible institution at the heart of the intellectual community here on MDI, surrounded by such natural beauty. And so it really is an absolute privilege and delight and honor for me to begin to discover COA and figure out how I can help to steward it into the years ahead. I want to first thank Sean Keeley, who today's session was really the brainchild of Sean Keeley. He's the Director of Institutional Advancement at COA. He introduced me to Duncan. I've learned so much in chatting with Duncan, and it's been a great pleasure. Sean organizes all of the coffees and conversations. For those of you who've had the opportunity to attend any of the Summer Institute programming, which is an absolutely magnificent week here of intellectual journey, reimagining, explorations, the theme this year. Please be sure to thank Sean if you find yourself there and loving that content. He does an amazing job of raising the profile of MDI on this island. So thanks to all of you for coming. And for those of you who are online, and we're going to really welcome your questions. To move to our featured guest. So today's conversation is going to feature and center on electrifying transportation and the implications for climate change and healthy communities. One of the great things about MDI is it attracts super interesting, competent, capable people like Duncan McIntyre. Duncan is the CEO and the founder of Highland Electric. He is a serial entrepreneur. He is a father of three. Lives in South Hamilton, Massachusetts with his wife, Kathleen. And when he's not there, he is on Cranberry Island here. Let's jump right into one of the things I'd love to start with. I work in venture capital, as Darren mentioned. I have an abiding respect for entrepreneurs and for entrepreneurship itself. And I'm always struck by sort of how does one become an entrepreneur? Duncan, did you grow up wanting to be an entrepreneur? Did you get bitten by the bug? Sort of what was your story? And one important thing to know, not only is he the founder of Highland, but he successfully sold a company that he had also founded previously for what I read publicly was $100 million. So that sounds like a pretty good deal. Tell us how you sort of happened into this.
Well, Roland, thanks for the introduction. And Deshaun, thank you for the invitation to be here today. I appreciate it. It's my very first introduction to the college you have here. And from the moment I drove in, I decided I liked everything about it. I parked next to a community garden and walked up and looked out at the ocean and got a quick tour of this amazing space. So thanks for having me. To your question, how did I become an entrepreneur? I don't think there was any moment in time. I think it's something that evolves. And I'm not an entrepreneur that has deep technical knowledge about how to create a better lithium-ion battery or how to improve a solar material. But I've always really liked business model innovation. And every emerging technology reaches a point where it's proven in the lab, and then it's been proven in sort of a small demonstration setting, kind of out in the wild. But you need to get it from there to sort of mainstream adoption and commercial scale. You often need to change the way the industry works. And so that's what I love. And I spent most of my career in renewable energy and found an angle around why wind farms and solar farms why that market wasn't growing as fast as it could. And this is 13, 14 years ago. And that was a thesis that evolved into writing a business plan, going out and testing it, and ultimately launching a company that was successful. Very similarly, we're here to talk about electrifying fleets. There was a moment in time, and I would say it was about 2017, and Elon Musk had proven to the world that you can develop a entirely battery-powered car that people actually wanted to buy. And much to the surprise of Ford and Toyota and General Motors, he had real commercial traction. People liked the cars, they told their friends about them, and I really attribute him to, as controversial as he may be, I attribute him to sort of creating the earliest of commercial traction in the EV space. We were also at a moment when lithium-ion batteries were really proven to be reliable, to be efficient. The cost curve was coming down, so they were getting cheaper and cheaper to make. And that coincided with, I would say, growing interest and demand from the local level. Transportation is local. As much as it's talked about in Washington, it is really driven at the local level. It's grassroots organizations, it's local politicians. Some of the best advocates have been small town mayors who just are adamant that this is how they want to leave their mark. And so my journey over the last 5 years has really been about following those trends, thinking deeply about what it takes to get technology that works into the hands of the local operators and do that in a scalable model. And so happy to go deeper into sort of how we do that.
I would love to go there and just talk a little bit about, I think one of the important themes here on MDI at COA and the world is climate change. And so before we even get into the details of how Highland operates, I think just understanding, is climate change at the core of what you are trying to address and solve, or is there a broader story? Sort of tell us a little bit about the demand for electrification, what's driving both your own interest in it and adoption.
Sure. I have always been sort of a passionate entrepreneur about solving climate issues, which is why I do what I do. And the company I run is very mission driven. Every single employee has their own, individual story that is all about the mission that we're on. I would say electrifying our transportation system has got to be part of addressing climate change, because today it's the only tech we have that really works, that allows us to take clean electrons from the sun or from the wind and transfer that power into propulsion. There's a long way. The industry still needs to come a long way to sort of realize the majority of our transportation infrastructure becoming electrified, but it is really the only tech we have available right now, realistically, to address climate change in a meaningful way. I'll make maybe one other distinction. I believe climate change is a worthy cause and a worthy way to spend one's career, but I would say probably 2/3 of our customers, and these are cities, governments, local transportation departments. If we go in and talk about climate change, we will never make any progress. It's too big of a thing for someone on the ground who's trying to get fleets out there reliably every day to feel like they can really tackle. But if we make it local, we focus on local health. Diesel tailpipes are the greatest cause of pediatric asthma in cities. It's not coal plants, it's diesel vehicles and the tailpipe emissions. And so if we can address that, we can start tackling local health in a very meaningful way. So we really sell on a story of, we're going to tackle local health. We're going to drive down the cost of transportation over time. We're going to make your transportation systems more reliable. And, oh, by the way, it is really good for the environment.
And so it sounds like for many, many of the schools, the municipalities that engage with Highland, that are interested in electrification, it's not a pure mission-driven, let's improve the environment. That almost perhaps is a very positive byproduct, but it's about the creating healthier communities. Is there an aspect around what are citizens? Why are citizens excited about this to the extent they are? What are they getting out of it? Is there something better for them than the sort of standard school buses running on diesel and things?
I think for communities, there are tons of local activists that really believe in this mission. They can walk around their cities and they can stand next to a bus and smell what they smell. And if you've ever stood next to a big diesel bus, you know what it smells like. And it doesn't take a degree in anything to know that that isn't really what your lungs should be breathing. So communities view it as an upgrade from a local health standpoint. If you've been around any transportation industry, you'd know that we've done a lot to make combustion engines reliable, but there's so many moving parts and so much service needed that it's actually they're not the most reliable. Like a big bus fleet has uptime of 85 to 90%. So you're always keeping spare vehicles if you're running garbage trucks, city buses, school buses, long haul trucks. You've always got spares to deal with maintenance and downtime. And so I think communities view electric as a simple, more reliable, cleaner solution. And maybe one last point, Roland, is communities often have strong advocacy, but those advocates tend not to have the ability to pull the purse strings. So you have to convince a CFO, a business leader. Sometimes we're dealing directly with a mayor's office or a superintendent or a school board or a county executive, local leaders, and they need to prove that it will cost the taxpayer no more money. And they can't do it because people want it. They have to find a way to make it neutral to the taxpayer in every case.
So for those in charge of dispersing capital and budgets for municipalities and school districts, it's about the return on investment. It is about the sort of efficiency of moving to electrification for consumers and those living in the communities, better health benefits, quieter, presumably.
Quieter.
So what's not to like, and maybe we can come back to that in a second, but I want to just touch on really today, I think Highland is first and foremost about electrifying buses for school districts. Is that the end vision, or sort of what's the broader plan?
So we see our mission as providing clean and affordable transportation to all. And we focus on cities because it's an area where there's growing demand and there's a real need. There's lots of fleets that run around a city, from parks and rec vehicles to street sweepers to garbage trucks to school buses. We started and focused entirely on the school bus market for our first 4 years. And today we're in 17 states and we're the largest operator of electric school buses in North America. And that's a function of focusing, really laser focusing on one application. School buses run 50, 60, 70 miles a day, predictable routes. They tend to come back to the same depot at night, which makes them a natural candidate for setting up charging infrastructure at scale, providing support services. It's a fleet that centers around the youngest members of our population. And young lungs develop better with cleaner air, and they're more adversely affected than adult lungs as they're evolving and developing. And so to us, it seemed like a natural fleet to transition to electric. And I started this business during the Trump administration. We had exactly zero tailwinds from the federal government. And what we could not anticipate is what the new administration has done. There's a big infrastructure bill. There's the Inflation Reduction Act, which has tax credits. And there are more tailwinds now putting capital behind this transition. So the bottom line is, started with school buses. We're into garbage trucks. We're into light duty vehicles, and we're into a bunch of other categories now.
Super helpful. I also want to come back to the infrastructure bill, but why don't we talk a little bit more deeply about what Highland actually does? My understanding is you don't make the buses or the batteries. There's no intellectual property. By the way, they raised $230 million, so there must be something there that people are excited about. But help us sort of understand what Highland does. What's this company all about?
Sure. If you think about the way a transportation department works, whether it's a branch of FedEx running trucks or it's a city running garbage trucks, the way these fleets have typically run is a transportation director buys buses, buys trucks, hires mechanics, hires drivers, and has some administrative overhead. It's been relatively simple for 100 years. With electric, you've got more complicated technology. You've got to deal with the interoperability of charging stations, vehicles, and the utility. The vehicles are much more expensive up front. And so cities and transportation departments tend not to have the budget to pay for those more expensive vehicles. But they operate much cheaper. The fuel is half the price of diesel fuel, half the price of gasoline. The maintenance is 70 to 80% less expensive. There are no oil changes. There are no emissions or exhaust systems. The There are really very few moving parts, very little to maintain. And so what we do as a company is we stitch together all the services needed to run an electric fleet smoothly. And we capitalize all of the equipment, the vehicles, the charging stations. We buy all the electricity. We install all of our equipment locally at their bus yards. And then we effectively rent them the whole fleet, fully fueled every day, operating, and we get paid by the mile. So imagine if someone came to you and said, don't buy your car. I'll put a car in your driveway. You can pick the specs if you want air conditioning and massage seats, whatever you want. You pick the specs. I'll put it in your driveway. I'll fuel it for you. It'll always work. And you just pay me 50 cents a mile. And if you drive it, you pay for it. And if you don't drive it, you don't pay for it. You might think about that. It saves a lot of hassle. So that's what we do for electrified fleets. And for city operators, they get to transfer the risk, technology risk. They're worried that they won't work. They get to transfer cost uncertainties. How much will it cost to fuel? They get to transfer the financial obligation of buying the equipment. Will I really be able to make this work long run? You know, how can I really afford it? Can I convince taxpayers that expensive vehicles are good because operating costs are cheaper? That's a difficult equation today. And so we operate these fleets on a performance-based contract.
So can you retrofit? I mean, there's a lot of school buses that are already out there. Can you take existing school buses and retrofit them? Or do we need to sort of start de novo with a brand new, fully day one electric bus?
You can retrofit them, but if you think about the dynamics of the market, there's a school bus, small school bus fleet that serves the public schools right here in Bar Harbor. And I don't know the exact number, but I think it might be something like 30 buses. And 3 of those buses every year on average are rusted. They're not going to pass inspection. They're going to the scrap yard. And 3 new buses are purchased to keep the fleet fresh. So if you're buying 3 new buses every year anyways, you might as well start by buying brand new electric. You get a warranty from a company like Daimler or Bluebird. If something breaks, you know there's a big company behind it. And there are better tax credits and more grants available for new vehicles. So we think there'll be a place for retrofits, but today the market is driven by your natural replacement cycle of keeping your fleet fresh.
So the school districts that you're working with today really operate, they've got a portion, this is a question, they've got a portion which are electrified and run by Highland, but presumably that's not their entire fleet. So they're also simultaneously running their traditional fleet as well.
That's exactly right. And if you think about those local dynamics, we are almost never hiring the drivers because cities have their own typically union drivers or their own driver staff. So we'll train their drivers and we'll provide them the vehicle. We'll make sure it's fueled and we'll make sure it's working. But to give you like an example, we have our largest contract is in Maryland, and it's with Montgomery County Public Schools, which is, I think, many of you know, a big county outside of Washington, D.C. They run 1,400 school buses total that serve students that go to 208 schools. One big transportation department running out of 5 depots that are spread out throughout the county. It's a big county. Our contract is to put 120 electric school buses in that fleet each year for 4 years. And we are, we're in the 3rd year of that deployment, but that is their natural cadence. 120 buses go to the scrapyard, 120 new buses arrive every August, and they get commissioned, they get tested, and then they get rolled out throughout the community.
Super helpful. Let's talk for a second about, so with the charging of these buses that's happening, your equipment, your buses, Highlands, but at the local school district or municipality in the future. But can you talk a little bit about, I was really interested to learn, there are some opportunities for Highland and those buses when they've got fully charged batteries. The buses are not being used all the time to send, as I understand it, send that electricity back to the grid. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how that happens, or whether you're doing that today or that's something in the future?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So what Roland's describing is an emerging market called vehicle to grid. And it's really all about the relationship that an electric vehicle has with the utility, the electrical grid. If we electrify all the vehicles in this country, we will need to double, roughly, our electricity generation. Twice as many power plants. Our distribution system would need to be upgraded everywhere. None of the lines would be sufficient. But we actually think that's not necessary. The industry thinks that's not necessary because we have a supply and demand balance, right? Our power plants make power in 5-minute increments to meet the needs of the community, right? There's a daytime rush where people are running air conditioning in most of the country in the summer. Businesses are open. At night, power requirements are much lower because people are sleeping. It tends to be, they're not running their dishwasher or their dryer. So we have this daily cadence of demand for power comes up, and then at night it goes down. If we can charge our vehicles overnight, we can flatten out that curve. And that means we don't need more poles and more wires in our communities. We just need to use the power more efficiently and use the distribution system more efficiently. Vehicles with big batteries have the opportunity not only just to use the batteries to drive around, but we can use the batteries to actually help the grid balance that supply and demand equation. And so a classic example would be in the summer in Maryland. I think some of you are from Virginia and Maryland. It gets hot. It gets hot, right?
It gets hot. That's why we come to Maine.
And that's why you come to Maine. Right. And so your air conditioning gives you comfort. Well, the grid is really stressed from 3 to 6 every afternoon, early evening, because it's at peak demand in July and August. And on the hottest days of the year, the grid does not have enough capability to provide all that people demand, which has led to brownouts, or it's led to what they call curtailment, where they actually shut down substations and they say, we don't have enough power, you're not getting power. It's happening more and more frequently across the country. If a fleet of school buses that's sitting idle because school's out can send power from its batteries back to the grid from 3 to 6 to help meet that peak demand. And by the way, it's only 10 or 15 days a year, the hottest days of the year. Then that means the utility doesn't have to build another power plant. They don't have to upgrade the distribution system. So we do that with our school bus fleets every day in the summer in New England and in Maryland. And we're launching, fleets that do this in Colorado and California. And we get paid for every hour that we send power back to the grid. We use that money to help cover the cost of electric school buses, which are very expensive. And so this is a whole emerging industry, which is finding out when to charge, when it's best for the grid, when it's cheapest to buy the power, and then figuring out when the grid needs help the most. And these vehicle fleets can start becoming an asset for local communities to balance the grid, to provide backup power generation during power outages, to support to support communities and make communities more resilient. And so to me, that's one of the most exciting things that we do as a company, but it's very difficult to get these programs up and running. It's taken many years, and we have to be a really reliable transportation company first.
Right. That's what entrepreneurship is all about, doing the hard thing. I imagine your investors also like there is a potential future revenue stream in that. So not only good for communities, good for the grid.
They like that.
But they like the money coming in the top too. Let's see, you touched a little bit, Duncan, on what's happening on Mount Desert as it relates, specifically to buses, and maybe even a little bit more broadly, what's happening in the state of Maine as it relates to regulation and demand. And is Highland working on MDI or anywhere in Maine yet?
We're not working on MDI. We're working a little bit in Maine, down sort of in the Portland area. And we'd be eager to create a bigger presence in Maine over time. We're focused on 17 states that are the most populated states in the country. They have bigger fleets. And in the early days of this market, they are the places where we can spend the money we need to spend to acquire customers, and we can actually get paid back for that. Having said that, as the market matures, we're seeing more and more interest from Maine. So there's an effort within the state legislature to change some of the laws around how schools fund transportation to be a little bit more friendly for electric. We've had interest from the local dealers and some local fleet operators, and we've helped them for free just to provide some of our expertise and support them, it just to sort of get the market going. But just specifically to MDI, I think the high school here in Bar Harbor was one of the first to adopt an electric school bus with a grant. It's a Lion Electric, which is a relatively new company, but they make great buses. And my understanding is that's been a big success, and I expect they'll extend that and replace more of their buses over time.
So they're doing it differently than if they were to use Highland. They actually own these buses. They were given a grant in Bar Harbor to purchase them. They've got to maintain them and,
That's right.
and sort of go through. So is that a potential customer profile for you down the road if they sort of realize maybe they don't want to be in the business of running these things?
That's right. Yeah, they are a potential customer. I think most cities can try one as a pilot without our expertise. They can get a charging station, they can plug it in at a building. It's when you're converting a whole fleet, you need cost effectiveness. You're never going to get enough grants. You need reliability. We brought 5 megawatts of power into each depot in Montgomery County, Maryland. Think about 5 megawatts of power. That is akin to 5 large hospitals. So the amount of power you need requires a totally different level of high voltage training, planning, expertise, and you really need to bring specialized teams to do that efficiently. So we could help Bar Harbor down the road if they were interested.
There's not necessarily a natural sequence. You could go to a school district that's already got electric buses and sort of take them over and maintain them and run them for them. You can go to
Absolutely.
school districts that don't have them. That makes sense. I believe in the state of Maine, and others can correct me if you know, I think they did just pass a bill in the legislature for zero emissions. Does anybody know if that's true? Don't take it for gospel. I know it had been under discussion. I thought I saw it online. Either way, it seems like states are some of the states where you're most active. I think New York has passed mandates around zero emissions as it relates to fleets and things.
That's right. I think Maine joined something called ACT, Advancing Clean Transportation, and maybe 12 or 15 states have signed on. But what it does is it is akin to making a commitment to transitioning basically all classes of vehicles to electric over time. And the commitment in 2024 is something like 8%, and then it goes to 12%, and it sort of steps up. But it's very much a commitment The trick is going to be, these are typically unfunded commitments. So they're commitments, but they haven't proposed to put any funding behind it. So they're leaving the local operators to figure it out on their own. And that's where we find it tends to break down sometimes.
So that presumably is the opportunity for Highland as well. Target those states that have passed these laws and then go in and help be part of the financing.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Let's talk for a few more minutes here before we get to questions. Just to talk a little bit about, you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, recent infrastructure bills, climate bills, and funding, very importantly, from the United States government. Can you talk a little bit about how that is presumably helping, maybe hurting, impacting Highland's business, and kind of what's the opportunity? What's the size of those sort of commitments by the government?
I'm sure everybody read about the infrastructure bill when it was passed a few years ago, and subsequently the IRA when it was passed. I see some nods. Yes.
2021, I think, was the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, and August of 22 was the climate and healthcare bill, $375 billion. It's a lot of money.
I mean, they're both staggering in terms of just the magnitude. Both of these programs are chock full of climate related incentives. They're funding everything from R&D to credits for manufacturers to get up to scale on producing everything from solar panels to electric vehicle batteries. And then they have funding for implementation and to provide credits for developers who are going to build projects. There's money for everything. We're fortunate in that there's a lot of money for electrifying fleets specifically, and there are tax credits. To put that into context, grants are accessible by everyone. Tax credits are difficult for public entities to monetize because public entities don't pay taxes. So if you look at the solar industry, tax credits have been available for almost 20 years in solar. And anyone who's done solar, Sean, you've got solar here, right? I think you've got quite a bit of solar on the roof. And it's probably privately owned, and it's under a power purchase agreement. You buy the power, but it's probably privately owned because a private entity can monetize those tax credits. And to put it into context, about half of a project can be funded with tax credits. So you would typically never spend the money to build a project without a tax credit strategy. It's just too expensive without the tax credits. So electric vehicles are now living in that world. The tax credits are so valuable that if you're doing anything at scale, you really need a strategy. And so we have a 20-person structured tax finance team at Highland that just organizes the ownership of these fleets. And what that means is we can offer about 30% off compared to buying a bus. So if a bus is $300,000, you work with us, it's $200,000, and we're making a third of it by the tax credits. I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but they are essential to driving this industry. Then the second piece is the grants. And I would say the grants are available to anyone. The federal government really is not staffed to administer a program of this scale. And they've hired and ramped up and tried to create efficiencies, but the rollout of the funding, I think, has been slower than communities would like to see, but it is starting to get going. And so we're starting to see the benefits of that. That funding is allowing us to build to transition fleets and build electrified depots in cities that really need this type of, infusion. Cities like Baltimore City. Baltimore City is a fantastic city, but they've never had a budget to do anything like this. And they've never had the administrative staff within leadership to go tackle something like this. And so to create public-private partnerships, draw on capital, bring private capital, and deliver services at scale is really exciting. We're building in Compton. California. Compton is a community that, I think is going to really benefit from this type of work.
I will remind everyone here, what I so admire about entrepreneurship is Duncan said they started this company back in 2017, 2018.
2018.
I will remind those of you that care to be reminded, President Trump certainly did not appear to be a friend of electrification or care much about climate. And I'm going to guess that the technology for the batteries and the buses themselves was not sort of fully present. So I just find it incredible what entrepreneurs do. They have an idea, they see the future. They don't necessarily know exactly when it's going to happen, and then they pop out at exactly the right moment. And I know it's not that easy, but it's unbelievable how much momentum there is behind this: funding, community demand. I want to talk right before we go to questions, one more. It all sounds great. These are better for communities. You can do it less expensively than owning it. But as with anything in life, there are always some dark underbellies. And I think specifically about the thousands of workers across this country in every community whose livelihood depends on maintaining equipment and school buses. Those jobs, if the future is electrification, presumably go away, or you certainly don't need as many people. So I'd love to, I can't be the first person who's thought of that. So can you talk a little bit about how to think about the unintended consequences of real life change for people whose jobs go away because of this?
With any technology change of this scale, there's going to have to be a workforce strategy in place. And there's one emerging in this industry. We're doing a tremendous amount of workforce development at the local level. We do training for diesel mechanics on how to work on electric vehicles. And then we also do training for them on how to work on the charging stations. So for those who are eager and interested in learning a new skill, they can almost guaranteed to be able to access free training, free continuous education on these topics, learn a new skill, and become part of this new movement. I would also say for those that are, there are some that are older, they maybe they're 5 to 10 years from retirement, they don't really want to learn a new skill. That's okay too, because it's going to take 15 years for these vehicle fleets to fully transition, or 20 years or more. In many communities, we see a shortage of diesel mechanics. It's not a job that people have wanted to go into for the last, call it, decade. It's been harder and harder to sort of attract new young talent into the space. And so there's actually quite a shortage of people to sort of maintain these aging fleets anyways. It's not a silver bullet. There will be a smaller staff needed to keep an electric fleet running smoothly than there is needed to keep a traditional combustion engine fleet running smoothly. So it's got to, the workforce development piece has got to be sort of part of the solution.
And maybe just to end on before questions, I keep threatening to let everybody ask questions, but I got so many myself. We need another session here. Here's the last one. I think just to hear your thoughts on, this is a process, this is a journey, electrification, not just of school buses, but of fleets and municipal vehicles. Where are we in that? And I think I had read somewhere today, there's something like about 1% of the overall in the US fleets that have moved to electrification. So if that's directionally correct, kind of where are we today, and how should we think about where we're going over the future, and how long? Is this 10 years out, 20 years out, 5 years out? How do you think about?
So if you think about history, a brief history on electrification, 120 years ago, a battery electric car was built that could travel something like 25 miles. It's technology that's been around for a very long time. It's just that the mass production, really led by Ford, of the automobile with a combustion engine was so efficient and so cheap, and fuel was so inexpensive that the battery electric technology never really got off the ground. Fast forward to the 1970s, when an oil embargo was in place. Some of you might remember that. Lines to get gas at gas stations. Our government, many governments said, oh my goodness, we have got to diversify. We are beholden to the Middle East. And all of a sudden, R&D to develop battery electric accelerated. Although it took a while. The Enfield 8000, does anyone remember the Enfield 8000? It was a battery electric car built in the early 80s, and it topped out at about 55 miles an hour. So 0 to 60, no. And it had a range of about 30 miles. So it wasn't very useful to anyone. Enter Elon Musk 15 to 20 years later. And in his typical bad boy fashion, he coined the phrase, until today, all electric cars have sucked. That was Elon Musk. And that was the introduction of the Model S. And I give you the history because it's actually been 120 years in the making. But today, for the first time ever, we are seeing growth of 60 to 80% in electric vehicles and passenger cars. The Ford Motor Company has said that all Ford 150 pickup trucks will be electric by 2030. The 150 is the cash cow of the Ford Motor Company. It is the most successful selling passenger vehicle ever in the world, in all categories. And they have said our cash cow will be all electric in 7 years. Daimler, you know, the best of German engineering, has said they will not make a combustion engine after 2028. That's 5 years from now. One of the largest medium and heavy duty makers of trucks and the maker of Mercedes has said they will not make a combustion engine. Every single auto manufacturer has electric vehicles in their pipeline. And as of a couple months ago, the last time I looked, Tesla's market cap was larger than Ford, Toyota, and General Motors combined. Just think about that for a moment. A car company called Lucid and another car company called Rivian that make electric pickup trucks and cars, both have market caps larger than Ford and General Motors. These are car companies that have barely delivered any cars to customers. So the transition is underway. The demand is there from the market. The proof point is that they work. They are incredibly efficient, incredibly quiet, and incredibly cheap to operate. The range is getting better and better. I have a car called a Lucid Air, and it has a 440-mile range. So I can drive from Hamilton, Massachusetts to the gas dock at Northeast Harbor where I pick up my whaler to go home. And then I can make it halfway home before I have to charge. And I can usually charge in the Portland area.
So entrepreneurs are always optimistic. By definition, it is a key characteristic, but I can sense the optimism of where things are going. Congratulations, you built a company at the center of something that really sounds like it's good for everybody. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. Sean, do you want to let questions flow? And
yeah, absolutely. I'll just ask folks who have questions to speak into the mic so that the folks who are joining us remotely can pick up the audio. And maybe right over here, the first one I spotted.
From Virginia. I'll skip that part. Riding around Maine, though, you listen to Maine Public Radio, and I picked up a story of these kids building a solar-powered car. 7th year competition, car got up to 70 miles an hour. You mentioned kids. Now, with these buses, do you have any connection to solar or maybe solar on the roof to turn into electricity?
It's a good question. You know, can you put solar on the roof of these buses and turn it into electricity? The short answer is you could, but my opinion is it'll take a very long time before that's the reality. And there's two dynamics I'll highlight. One is that most of these fleets have really strict safety standards. And when you start integrating solar into a roof, you've got wiring, you've got power flowing from the roof down, and you've got major safety issues. You know, these vehicles have to survive crash tests and rollover tests, and it's all about safety, and they're very strict. So getting through the safety standards just for a battery electric vehicle is hard enough. And then the second reason I think it's going to be a long time is because what you're focused on is the intersection of clean power and affordable power. And you really need both. And it's more efficient to build a solar farm in a field somewhere and then move the power through the distribution system and charge at a charging station, because those panels are really efficient. They're made at scale. They're cheap. They're eligible for tax credits. And that's a very efficient industry that we have. Integrating solar into vehicles and equipment that's mobile is much more expensive. It would be done in very low volumes, and I think it would end up being a lot more expensive. So I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be many, many years. What I would say is we have a whole energy trading desk at Highland. It's 3 people, and we are buying power from wind and solar farms throughout the Midwest under power purchase agreement. And then we're threading that power through retail energy suppliers who can sell it to us at our point of delivery. And so we have projects in Illinois, in Michigan, right outside of Detroit, in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, and in Maryland that are all supplied by wind farms. And so that to me is the most efficient, best way to leverage the industry we have today, what's available. We can do it relatively affordably. It's complex, but it's worth it because we can deliver completely emissions-free transportation to communities, which is pretty cool.
This is fascinating and not exactly what I thought I was going to get today, but still amazing. But I did have one little thing that I didn't quite understand when you were talking about Rivian having a larger market cap than XY. Could you define market cap?
Sure. Rivian's a publicly traded company. So think about it as a metric that's close to enterprise value. The value of the company to shareholders. And so shareholders are always buying because they think companies are going to have earnings and deliver dividends. And Rivian is losing money, and they're losing not a little bit of money. I think they're losing something like $400 million a year. But the promise is they'll grow and they'll start delivering earnings versus Ford that delivers earnings every single quarter. And they have for, 50 or 70 years.
And there was a company before Rivian called Tesla, which had a very similar story in terms of losses, et cetera, right? So it's not irrational necessarily that they may be wrong, but it's not irrational that someone might believe the future for Lucid as a competitor to Tesla is bright.
That's right. And Tesla lost money until about a year or two ago, right? They're only barely profitable.
Yes, without question, but demonstrating that there is perhaps a profitable business model to a consumer-based electric car.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is that public perception is that Rivian is bigger than Ford in terms of value, which is crazy, because it's Ford Motor Company compared to a 7-year-old startup that's delivered 5,000 trucks.
Steve,
Right.
right behind you.
Yeah.
Terrific talk, Duncan, and great work. And Roland, your questions are really probing and I think very valuable. So one person to remember between Enfield and Elon Musk is Amory Lovins,
Yes.
who founded the Rocky Mountain Institute. And he spoke here a good long talk. Could be going on still, I don't know. Many years ago, when he was working on Hypercar was going to be electric and all kinds of good things. It failed. But one thing that I remember from his talk that really quite surprised me was his emphasis on deploying the hypercar in fleets. And I'd been thinking about consumer purchase of individual cars. So now you have pioneered the fleet initiative, and I'm wondering what you see going forward. What's the balance going to be in driving the electrification market between individual automobiles and fleet construction and operation?
The light duty market, passenger car market for the most part, is in a growth trajectory. I don't know the exact statistics, but it may be that 1 out of 10 cars purchased today are electric. And I think that market is growing at 30% a year steadily. Fleets are really just coming into their own. Fleets tend to be heavier duty. They tend to have more rigorous applications. They go more miles. We're deploying electric garbage trucks, and those things get beat up every single day. They get beat up. It's tough to keep them on the road. And the market has needed more time to develop the tech to really meet the rigorous duty cycles of fleets. But the promise is that the fleet category could actually grow much faster than passenger cars, because passenger cars require consumer adoption. People have to get comfortable with the range anxiety of where can I fuel. Fleets have the promise of being able to turn over very quickly. And it's a function of cost more than anything, but cost and the local dynamics of the politics wherever the fleet's being deployed. And we're more successful in the early days, you know, in largely sort of coastal democratic states. But recently we've seen an uptick from the center of the country too. And they care about local health just as much as anyone else, and they care about cost. And so if you can run the fleets cheaper, you can convert them very quickly. And so I think fleets will end up growing faster over the next couple of years, is my opinion.
So I would think once you sell, it may take a long time to sell a municipality, but once you sell that municipality, all of a sudden they light up hundreds, if not, you know, over time. So it's
You convert the first couple vehicles and the drivers love them. The drivers call it driving a spaceship. The communities love them. And it's hard to go back to buying a combustion engine vehicle, we found.
So Duncan, you mentioned that you mentioned something about the batteries and being lithium batteries. So since a big controversial subject, since Elon Musk has launched Tesla, have been the life of the batteries. So can you talk about that, and as well as the impact of the basically the dead batteries in the environment once they're unusable?
Yeah, it's a really good topic. So lithium ion batteries degrade over time. So year 1, they're the most powerful. And by year 10, maybe they'll only hold 85% of their initial state of charge from a decade earlier. The reason that's important is because if you're planning on your bus going 100 miles a day, by year 10, maybe it can only go 85 miles. And so when is that point where it can no longer meet the duty cycles that are required? The industry has not solved this. Nobody knows exactly what we're going to do, but I'll tell you, there are very promising recycling initiatives that are underway. I have an opinion that we're proving out this year, and that is that every battery that's no longer fit to do service in a vehicle will go into grid management. So if you think about our grid, we have all these substations in places where we pull power from high voltage transmission down to the local level. And then when a community grows, that has to be upgraded because the community needs more power, more people, more businesses. You can avoid those upgrades with storage. And you can also do more of this peak shifting. I described everyone running air conditioning systems in the afternoon. You can create localized battery banks that help balance the grid, create a more efficient grid, lower the cost to ratepayers. And you can also provide backup power to community centers, grocery stores that need to rely on cold storage. You can stop deploying diesel generators and propane generators and do more with battery backup. And so I have an opinion that a battery in a bus or a truck has a life of 10 to 20 years, depending on how many miles you drive. And when it's no longer fit for that service, it can spend another 20 years providing backup power to a building or grid management. So we feel quite confident that we can apply what we're doing with vehicles to this same activity. And we've got some small projects where we're proving that out this fall. But the bottom line is we think as these markets mature, we're extending the life of lithium packs longer and longer and longer. And I don't believe they will ever end up in a landfill. I truly believe they will find use cases that are appropriate for as much as 50 years, and then they'll be recycled and they'll be reinvigorated into new batteries. But it is not a place where the industry has the perfect answer today, and it's one of the things we have to accomplish in the coming decade with more certainty.
Perhaps an opportunity for another entrepreneur.
Without question.
I think we have time for one more question, and then
Yeah.
perhaps I'm not sure if Duncan will be able to stick around a little bit
Sure.
at the end for
Yeah.
other folks who didn't get a
Thank you.
chance.
Thank you, Duncan. I'm David Gibson. I'm the Director of Energy here at COA. Very excited to hear what you're doing with fleets. On the battery recycling note, I read probably about a year ago that there's a company that is recycling old lithium ion batteries, and they are getting a longer lifespan and better power out of them than the batteries that they're recycling when they were brand new. And so actually they're creating better batteries. The technology has advanced enough. So I think there's a real opportunity there. What I wanted to ask specifically, COA has a fleet of 12 to 15 passenger vans. We're building a new dorm. You've probably seen that if you've walked through our campus. I'm really excited about the vehicle to grid and the backup power. Probably all of you know that we have fairly frequent power outages in Maine, the worst reliability of any utilities in the country. And so I would love to have a fleet of electric vans that we can plug in and use to back up our buildings during outages. I'm curious where you see that. I know you're talking about getting into slightly smaller vehicles, if that's 2 years out or 5 years out, or we need to talk to someone else, about making that happen. But just curious about that and how we could apply it here on campus.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I love that you're thinking that way, and I'm not surprised based on what I've learned about COA. So very cool. The short answer is the tech is there to do what you want to do, just barely. And we can follow up offline, but we have a director of technology at Highland who can answer all those questions better than I can. But the bottom line is, think about it like your building would have a smart panel that would allow in a grid outage that panel can island the building and draw power from vehicles or from a stationary battery or from a solar panel on the roof. So it's like building your own mini microgrid, and the tech is there to do it. It's a microgrid controller, some form of a battery input, and some algorithms to make sure it knows what to do when the power goes out. But the tech's there, and you should be able to do it affordably, and love to help if you want. Yeah.
think President Collins is gonna shut us off here. But hopefully Duncan will stay around.
I can,
Thank you both, and David, definitely make that happen. All right, yeah, before the day's over, right? And you're right, this is a low angle roof on this building, but there are 323 solar panels that produce about 136,000 kilowatt hours a year, and it is in a PPA. But thank you both so much. Really interesting, really exciting. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
all the
Roland.
questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you very much.
And just remember, there is no coffee and conversation a week from today. But if you haven't registered for the Summer Institute, that begins on Monday, July 31st. There'll be a large tent on our north lawn, and it is going to be fantastic, but you definitely need to register for that. So hope to see many of you there, and thank you again.
And
both.
don't miss it. It is unbelievable. So
Yeah.
please come. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.